We're going to be live and live. We're already live, but this is interaction. This interaction is live. But the student can see you as
can hear me. Can ask me.
yes. Buembo, good morning. Buembo, Brorin, good morning. Buembo, switch on your mic. Can we hear from you? Buembo, Brorin. You'll get this question wrong. So start teaching. Whoever is not out, whoever is outside the discussion room is being captured. But as you go on, tell them to come into the discussion
room. To talk to me.
So
good morning, students. We are going to look at shadows of time. You know, it has been a long time, and we are losing a lot of time without covering what we are meant to cover. We would have straight away gone to a new book, but I suspect you have not read the book, and I would wish to inquire from you whether you have the copies and have read them, so that we can engage in discussion, and maybe by the time we meet again, we just polish up on that book. If that was the case, it would do us great good here. So I request that as we are home, much as we are home, because we engage in discussions, we could as well try and buy Grief Child. I don't know whether you're with me, and you tell me how many of you have copies of this book, so that we plan until going ahead to study the book. Are you there, class? Hello? Are you there? I would like to know whether we have the copies of Grief Child, so that we can embark on another book and move. I don't know whether you have read it or you have the copies. So please, you could tell me. I don't want to work on assumptions, because my assumption is that maybe we do not have this novel, yet it is the next novel that we are supposed to cover. But as for today, we are going to remind ourselves of what we looked at in our novel that we studied. Remember, we had completed Shadows of Time, and we had discussed certain things, but we did not look at certain areas together, though you are supposed to make research on them. I would like to take you through a question that is real, sometimes set on different books, where you know when the writer comes up with a title, there are so many things attached to the title, and the writer wants us to understand this book, and then we relate with the title that he has given the book. And we shall show what the title speaks, where we can find it in the book. The title of our text is Shadows of Time. I remember when we were in class, we tried to interpret the title by looking at the words in it. A shadow. We may not zero on time, but the key word here is shadow. And we know what a shadow is. A shadow is an area of darkness. Usually when we talk of a shadow, our own shadows usually follow us. So we want to locate in our text, do we have areas of darkness? Do we have certain things that follow the characters? Because it is not you and I that are in this book. But we have characters in the book, and we have to relate to the characters that Lawrence uses here. If we say a shadow is an area of darkness in which people and things cannot be seen, a shadow is dark. When you look at the shadow, you cannot see the inside of it. You see just a small shape of you, a shape of you, but the inner bit of you cannot be seen. That is why we say, a shadow creates darkness, and that darkness stops us from seeing the people and things in that shadow. Now, when you go to the text, if we are to look at the shadows of time in the novel Shadows of Time, if we could frame a question for this, then the question would be, which are the shadows of time in Lawrence's novel Shadows of Time? My dear students, if you could write that down. Which are the shadows of time in Lawrence's novel Shadows of Time? What could you say are the shadows of time? Which is the shadow that we see in this novel? Which area of darkness do we see? What is it that seems to be a little unclear in this novel? What is it that stops us from seeing people and things? And on this note, I would say that when you look at Shadows of Time as a title, we are going to say the title, Shadows of Time, is actually symbolic. I am talking about the title being symbolic. What do we mean by symbolic? Something symbolic, we get the word symbolic from the word symbol. A symbol will stand for something. For example, when you look at our school badge, it has symbols in it that stand for something. If you look at the national emblem, it has symbols in it that do stand for something. When you look at the national flag, our flag, it has three colors: the yellow, red, and black. And those colors are representing something else besides the black, the mere black that you see. Besides the red as a color. The red stands for something else, which is not a color. Black stands for something else, which is not a color. Yellow stands for something else, which is not a color. So on that note, the colors are symbolizing or are representing something else. So when we talk about Shadows of Time, we are saying the title itself is symbolic. It has symbols in it that do actually represent something else in the society, something else that has not been brought out so openly. But when we dig into the text, we get to understand what is it that the shadow is representing here. So when you look at the novel Shadows of Time, we are saying when the society is characterized by suffering, at a symbolic level, we would say the shadow stands in to represent suffering. Now, when you look at the suffering here in the novel, we look at characters that undergo intense suffering. Go to our main character there. The main character there is Flora. We would say right from the start, Flora undergoes a lot of suffering. Flora at first seems to enjoy her life, but what she creates in her life later on takes her through a lot of suffering. She suffers when she decides to settle down, having got a husband, a loving husband by the name of Steve. She begins suffering because there are things that are trying to ruin her life that had turned out to be very beautiful, of which Tom is one of them. Tom tries to create a lot of misery in her life. And that maybe explains why finally we see Flora attempting to commit suicide. It is out of suffering. You know, Tom creates a lot of suffering in the sense that, we see Tom taking her to the Mzungu's place for selfish gains. And while there, even on her way to the Mzungu's place, Flora is raped repeatedly and she's taken to the Mzungu and she sleeps with the Mzungu. And she seems not to enjoy this. She's very uncomfortable with the experience. So we could say she physically suffers because the men in the car beat her up and rape her repeatedly. And then she suffers physically and she also suffers emotionally. Even later on, when she learns of the fact that the husband is going to be killed by Tom, as revealed by Composita, we see Flora suffering as she tries to find ways of ensuring that she saves the husband, but to know, every effort of hers is in vain. So we are saying, which are the shadows of time in Shadows of Time? One of the shadows of time in the novel Shadows of Time is the suffering that is created in the society because of what the different characters have to go through. So we have seen the level of suffering in regard to the main character. We would say maybe in this novel there are other people that do suffer. Yes, the community suffers because politically we see insecurity in this society. The government happens to kill people anyhow because they have a feeling they are planning to overtake them. You remember how Mr. Ruhu actually ends up losing a brother, which causes emotional suffering, obviously. You remember how people pray for the rain because of the drought, because they are dying of hunger and they have no hope. So that also points at the suffering that the community is going through, besides the suffering that we have looked at, that our main character, Flora, does go through. Now, the other shadow in the novel Shadows of Time is the injustice. Remember, we said that shadow is anything that is unclear because there is darkness in it. Darkness has been created and things turn out to be very unclear. When you look at injustices, the way things are done in the society is very unclear, especially when we go to the political side. When we go to the political side, you realize that the government seems to come up with things that are really pressing onto the society. And remember Mr. Ruhu's discussion with Steve, they hint at this and even claim that they seem not to understand their own lives and they do not understand what is going on. So why are they secretly planning an overthrow? Because the state of affairs is not good at all. Where is the injustice? The injustice is in the fact that people are murdered anyhow without reason. Take an example. If we had a certain trend of doing things that is acceptable in the society, then we wouldn't have had Tom planning to take Steve's life which he manages to do at the end of the day, simply because he has maneuvered in this government and he has acquired a position that gives him room to do whatever he wants. He takes on Steve's life out of revenge. So if things were done in a straight way, if there was no injustice in this community, then that wouldn't have happened. But because there is injustice, people's lives are taken anyhow, unfairly, because being unjust is being unfair. You realize that Steve is murdered unfairly. You realize that the Mr. Ruhu, the likes of Steve, the Mzungu, wherever they would have an encounter with Flora, they'll end up losing their cars because somebody has taken the car. And we are very much aware that whoever kept on stealing their cars was none other than Tom. So that marks the injustice. So when we look at the shadows of time in the novel Shadows of Time, the one of the shadows that we see in the novel, like we said, is the suffering. The second shadow that we see, where things seem to be very unclear, are the injustices in society. The third shadow we see in this novel is the fact that people are unemployed. We have a problem in the society of joblessness. People turn out to be jobless. They seek for jobs. Why do we say people are jobless? Remember, the characters we see here are a representation of other characters in the society. They stand to represent those ones that we do not see in this book. Flora stands to represent women in this book. She also stands to represent people who are in search of jobs. So when we talk about the joblessness, we could use an example of Flora, who decides to keep on giving in her body with hope that this is the only way that she can acquire a job. As much as she was too ambitious, in the sense that before she completes school, she so wishes to get a job, but in her search for a job, she moves miles and miles without gaining success. We, at one point of time, see her almost giving up after going through very nasty experiences. In her search for a job, we see what society does to her. We have the image of how the big shots, the position people look at society when it comes to women looking for jobs. They tend to think that it is through exploitation that they will succeed in getting jobs. That is the sole reason why, wherever she goes to ask for a job, she's instead driven to people's bedrooms, she's driven to lodges, she's driven to hotels to first give in her body if these men are to finally give her the job. The case in point here, you remember, is Tom, who is her first boyfriend. The other person we also see thinking that this girl has to sleep with her in order to get a job is Mr. Lupoy. So one of the shadows, the other shadows that we see in this novel is the joblessness in this society, the search for jobs. Thanks be to Mr. Ruhu, who finally gives her a job without any strings attached. Um, we also have another shadow in this novel. The other shadow that we could look at is the drought. You know, when you look at the hopelessness in the society, the hopelessness of the people is a shadow in itself. What makes people so hopeless is the drought that comes in. In the novel, we are taken through the different steps taken on by the society in order to fight the drought. We see the church organizing prayers on several occasions. Remember the prayers that are attended by Flora and Steve as the community is praying for the rain. The drought itself is a shadow because it makes things very unclear. People do not seem to know the way forward. They are scared of their lives. They are not very sure of whether they will actually survive the next minute. So you realize that the drought itself is a shadow in the novel Shadows of Time, because it creates the suffering, because it creates uncertainty, because it creates hopelessness amongst the people in society. And we see them coming out to fight. We see them coming out to find ways of ensuring that they put the drought to an end by organizing the prayers and so many others. So I want you to consider Shadows of Time to be the hard times. The shadows of time are the hard times that the characters have to go through. You look at Flora going through so many hardships in her life. We look at Steve because of his involvement with Flora. He faces hardships. We look at the populace. We have just talked about the society experiencing the drought, the joblessness, and etc., which are also turning out to be shadows. But remember, when you interpret the meaning of a shadow is not only a dark spot that stops you from seeing a person or things, but a shadow follows you. So when we are looking for the shadows in this novel, we look at certain things that keep following our characters. So we would say, if we look at certain things that keep following the characters in their lives, we would say that the negative things that the negative actions that Flora engages herself in, let her keep on following her in her life until when we come to the end of the novel. When we have a shadow, it follows you up. So whatever follows the character is a shadow in itself. So we shall go down to the novel, and then we look at certain things. What are they that really follow up Flora? One of them that follows her up is her reckless life. The reckless life that she lives at the start of the novel follows her up to the end of the novel. You realize that the mistake that she makes at the start create the shadows that keep following her. And later on, we realize that she finds it so hard to even find a way of disentangling herself from the web of cobwebs that she has buried herself in. So her mistakes that haunt her come to affect her future and keep a dark part in the life that she leads. You remember her if we are to look at the quotations, because as you're writing your essays, students, you should also remember that if you remember certain statements that were made by the characters, they could also directly help link to the shadows that we are talking about, and then use them in the essays that you write. At one point of time, when we look at the shadows that follow her because of reckless life, at one point of time, Flora says, there is a single day, a single day, uh, a single day of my life that I wish I could forget. You know, she's fighting to forget that day because it keeps following her, which day we are looking at as a shadow. Now, why does she say this? Because she regrets it came into her life. She even goes ahead. It has become a shadow that has failed to disappear even when the sun is at its zenith. It has become a shadow which has failed to disappear even when the sun is at its zenith. When we talk about the sun being at its zenith, that means that the sun is at its what? Peak. So the reckless life she leads at the start of the novel keeps following her in her life, because of the mistakes that she made right from the start. It darkens her future and haunts her for the rest of her life. Which are the mistakes that Flora has made? One of them is the hard decision of having an affair with Tom. You know, when she meets Tom and when it is raining, she later realizes, much as the man is trying to draw her attention, she later realizes that she wants to beat what other students think about her back in school. We are told in the novel that Flora was always teased by the friends, that she did not have a boyfriend. Now she wants to prove herself to the rest of the students by getting a boyfriend. But she makes a decision, one, when she's so young. Remember, at this point of time, Flora is supposed to sit her senior 4 exams. She's too young. Two, she's making a decision on a man that she does not know. Three, her decision is so immediate because when you read the novel, you realize that it is that very day when Tom gets Flora that Flora and Tom end up sleeping in a lodge. And she even goes ahead to say this is the day that she actually loses her womanhood. So when you look at the shadows of time, in the novel Shadows of Time, it is Flora's past experience and mistakes when she leads a reckless life that keeps haunting her and following her in the whole of her life, which later makes her regret all the decisions that she makes. When we say she's reckless in the sense that from that point of time, wherever she would meet a man, she would always have that urge of always sleeping with that particular man. We see Flora meeting Mr. Rupoy when they go to the university, having been taken there by Mike. Remember, she goes to the university after meeting Mike, who happens to be the sister's boyfriend. Now, she has already slept with Mike, well knowing Mike is her sister's boyfriend. Then she continues for a party and meets Mr. Rupoy. And when she gets there, she ends up making very seductive moves because now she feels the man has a very good body and she would love to end up with him in bed. Her life is so reckless. She jumps on anybody that comes her way. She seems to have she doesn't have a no in her vocabulary, in the sense that she's jumping on everybody that comes her way. That becomes a shadow. That becomes something that haunts her. That becomes attached to her and keeps following her wherever she goes. To the point that, if you remember very well, we see Flora later meeting her school teacher, and she also ends up sleeping with her school teacher. If you were to number the number of men that Flora sleeps with, there are quite many in this novel. Now, the other shadow that we have in the novel, as looking at the incidences that keep following her, she cannot disentangle herself from them because they follow her just like our own shadows do follow us, is the murder of her husband by Tom. Tom takes advantage of the position he has in the government and ends up creating misery in the life of Flora. Flora has that shadow that follows her because remember, when the husband is killed, she feels she cannot stand anymore and she decides to also take her own life. But before we get there, we look at what was the cause of Steve's murder. Steve ends up being murdered by Tom because of certain reasons. One of them is the fact that Flora has had a relationship with Tom before the coming in of Steve. Two is the fact that when Steve realized that his car had been stolen, he makes investigations and ends up sending Tom into jail. So as a result of Tom revenging, he decides to take on Steve's life, thinking he can have Flora back, but it does not work out. So you realize the existence of this man in Flora's life ends up leading to the misery that she faces simply because the loving husband, who is none other than Steve, has been murdered by Tom, that Flora seems to know very well. The other shadow maybe we could talk about is her marriage to Tom out of love. Is her marriage to Steve out of love. What she had in her life with other men became footprints which keep haunting her. So you see Flora making a decision to get married, but the footprints of not only Tom keep haunting her in her life. That is why at a point of time there are certain secrets she cannot reveal to her loving husband. For example, when Composita tells Flora that Tom would wish to meet her, and when Flora tries to hesitate, Composita warns her that if she does not do so, then Tom is planning to kill the husband. So out of courtesy and because of love, we see Flora deciding now to go ahead and sleep with Tom in order to save her loving husband. So those footprints are haunting her. She cannot now erase that ugly life. She cannot erase all the men that have been in her life. Now, when I talk about the men, Tom comes in because of a relationship. The other person that has become a problem here, because much as he acts as a messenger, but he's also a super glue. When she's kind of reluctant to do what she has been told to do, he comes on to press, and that is none other than Composita. Remember Composita? Flora meets Composita on her way back from the game park when they had gone to share very good moments with Steve. When the car is stolen, they decide to take on a truck. That is where he meets this Composita. But ever since Composita came into her life, we see Composita coming back into her life and becoming a pain, which means Composita too is also turning out to be a shadow in Flora's life. Finally, when you look at the shadows of time, in shadows of time, look at Flora's friend Jennifer. We see Flora meeting Jennifer way back when they were still at work. But later on, they meet while at the university. And at the university, we see Flora, committing suicide. But when she commits the suicide, she leaves a note behind to her friend Flora. This keeps haunting her because she ends up losing a friend. And we see her all the time having a lot of questions in her mind as to why Jennifer would commit suicide. She could not see any reason as to why she would go ahead to commit suicide, much as we as readers, we have certain feelings that her death could have been caused by something else. But what is painted on ground is the fact that Jennifer has committed suicide. So you realize we have looked at a number of things, around 10, that could be considered as shadows in the novel Shadows of Time. We have identified what the shadows could be that could qualify the title that is given to this text, which is Shadows of Time. I hope you still remember them. Unfortunately, I seem not to get any communication from you. You would have actually helped in adding more of what you think could be the shadows of time in this novel. Anybody on that could tell us what you think the shadows of time are, besides what we have talked about, bearing in mind how we have tried to demystify what a shadow is and relate it to the happenings in the novel, and then we dig for what could be the shadows here. You realize there are so many statements that are made here by several characters, especially Flora, hinting at the fact that they are shadows. They are shadows. So he calls Tom as a shadow that is following her. So we would relate that and then get what a shadow is. When you look at the conversation between Mr. Ruhu and Steve, they talk about them being their own shadows because of the current regime. So you realize that what they are talking about points at the shadows of time. We talked about the anarchy and insecurity and the uncertainty as appearing as a shadow. So when they talk about them being shadows of their own life, we see the shadows of time that the writer is talking about. I don't know whether there is anybody there to tell me of another shadow that they think the writer presents that we might not have pointed at. Do we have somebody on that would give us the shadow? Hello? Are we there? Do you have anybody to give us a shadow? Kayongo, are you there? Let us move to another thing. If we have grasped the shadows, in the shadows of time, the other thing I wanted us to look at is the characterization. They will ask us to show the character of the different personalities in this novel. But in this case, we should be in position to look at the main characters that we have there. The main characters that we have there are basically Flora, that is the main character, but we have other characters like Steve. He also happens to be covered very well in the text. We have people like Steve. We also have people like Tom. He's also another developed character there. And Jane. They are the dominant characters that we would dig for and then see that we understand them fully. I want us to look at the issue of characterization. If they said you make a comment on or you show the character traits of any of the two characters in the novel, let us pick on those four, and then if the question requires you to look at mainly two, you can discuss only two characters. When you look at characterization here, I want us to begin with Florence Wong. When a question is posed on characterization, before you even begin giving us the character traits of those individuals, you have to go ahead and make whoever is reading your essay get to know who these people are. And that will be the introduction. Who are these people? Because we meet them in the text, we get to know them. So in defining who they are, then we zero to the information that is given to us about them in the text. If we begin with the Flora Wong here, we could say our opening paragraph would talk about who she is. If I were to talk about who Flora Wong is, I would say she's a student. One thing I know that is said in the novel, Flora Wong is a student in senior 4, according to the way she's presented in the novel. Flora Wong is a student in senior 4, about to sit exams. Now, here I am saying Flora Wong is a student in senior 4. about to sit exams. I have used is because when you're writing your essay in literature, your essay has to be present. You should always desist from, writing essays and using the past tense. Flora wangu, it is like we happen to get to know that person that particular moment. So we say Flora wangu is a student in senior 4 about to sit her exams, her final exams. What else do we know about Flora Wangu? The other thing we know about her is that she's a sister to Jane. Because in the novel, the only relation of hers that we meet is none other than Jane, and this is the person that she lives with. So we are going to say Flora Wangu is a senior 4 student that is about to sit her exams. She's also a sister to Jane. But later on in the novel, we even get to know her the more because she gets married to Steve's daughter. So we are going to also say Flora Wangu is later, or Flora Wangu later on turns out to be a wife to Steve's daughter. Flora Wangu is a senior 4 student. Flora Wangu is a sister to Jane. Flora Wangu later on turns out to be a wife to Steve's daughter. And there's another thing again that we know about Flora Wangu. As a result of her marriage to Steve's daughter, when she gets married to Steve's daughter, they give birth to a son. And that son is by the name of Peter. So the other thing that we later get to know is that Flora Wangu in the novel is a mother to Peter. So the 4 things that the writer takes us through are enough for us to use in order to define who Flora Wangu is before we get into her personality, before we get to talk about her character traits. So what we have been talking about will be used in the introduction, and we shall define or make somebody who is reading our essay get to know who Flora Wangu is. Flora Wangu will be that person who is a mother to Peter. Flora Wangu will be that person who was later married to Steve's daughter. Flora Wangu will be that person who is a sister to Jane. Flora Wangu will be that person who, in the novel, happens to be a senior 4 student that is about to sit exams. So, when you look at the character of Flora Wangu, now we get into her character. Number one thing that is so dominant in the novel is that Flora Wangu is a lustful character. We see Flora Wangu being so lustful in the first part of the novel. In the first part of the novel, what makes her lustful? It is because, she ends up engaging herself with so many men simply because she has been teased by her friends at school for not having a boyfriend. So in doing so, we see her developing a very high appetite for men. We say high appetite for men because when you look at the novel, Flora does not wait for the man to take any advance. Before the man takes any advance, we see Flora taking advances on other men. So Flora Wangu is a lustful character because her friends tease her at school that she does not have a boyfriend, and in the fight to defend herself, she develops a very high appetite for men in the sense that whoever comes her way, she ends up feeling like jumping with that man into bed. On that note, in the novel, we end up seeing her having relationships with so many men, more so with whoever comes her way, even without making advances on her. Examples of these men include the Tom we have talked about, Mr. Lupoy, who is a lecturer at the university, Mike, who happens to be a husband to her sister, the school teacher, who was at once her teacher, and many more others. Uh, because of her being lustful, we are told in the novel that she looked at men as if she were a bone and were the dog. You know, a dog loves eating bones. So she would regard herself as a bone, and men would turn out to be the dog. And you see her lustful nature when she goes to the university, where when she gets an encounter with with Lupoi, and she feels like she should be eaten up by Mr. Lupoi. So Mr. Lupoi also takes advantage of that, and at the end of it all, we see Flora and Mr. Lupoi ending up in a hotel for a night. Number two, when you look at Flora's character, we would say Flora is seductive. Flora is a seductive woman. Trevor, you would like to speak? Can you speak? Trevor, Kayongo. Kayongo, are you there? Trevor, 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 are you there? Yes, speak, Kayongo. Eh. You are giving? She's also? Eh. Yes. The money. Mm. Trevor, you are right. You're very right. When you list the character of Flora, she turns out to be very materialistic. Um, we could say, on that note, Flora is possessed with material possession and money. She is possessed with material possession and money. Remember at the start of the novel, she keeps on pausing and feeling so great because Tom is giving her a lot of money. And we are told that when she gets this money, she goes to buy dresses, makeup, shoes. That is where her interest is. And actually, because before she got to know how dangerous Tom was, she at one point made a statement that she could not let go of Tom because of the money, the lots of money that Tom was giving her. So when you say that she's materialistic, you are more than right. She's possessed with material things and money. The moment you have money, we only see a change Flora later on when we see her getting involved with Steve. I was talking of the fact that the other thing we could talk of Flora as character, we would say Flora is a seductive woman. She's a seductive woman. A seductive woman is one person who keeps on seducing men. If you flash back into the novel, yes, at several points in the novel, she keeps on enticing men into sexual encounter. Even before Tom makes any proposal. Remember when they meet when it is raining and she realizes there's a man standing near her and her body is telling her she wants the man. What does she do? In her mini uniform, a skirt which is mini, she drops a pencil and picks it. In doing it, she wants to expose her beautiful, young, succulent body to Tom to entice him the more. And indeed, she succeeds because from there, Flora is taken into Tom's car. She's driven home to change from the uniform. And later on, they go to the bar and they end up spending a night in a hotel. So she's so seductive. We see her at first seducing Tom. You know, when you look at Tom, he seems to be a very experienced and dubious man. But this young schoolgirl could, almost beat him at this point, if she could easily give in and even make seductive moves that further entice Tom to ensure that he sleeps with this girl that very day. She does not only entice Tom, she also entices Ruhu Simon when they dance together at the party. We also see Flora enticing Mike, who happens to be the sister's husband. Remember when he goes home visiting and Jane is not at home, and then Flora decides to get into her bedroom, leaving the door open. She comes back wearing a very short attire and then goes back, enticing this man to follow her. That finally lures Mike into sleeping with Flora in her room at her sister's place. So you realize Flora is also seductive. So Nantongo Mariam says Flora is also promiscuous. Very right. Flora is promiscuous. We would get examples because when you get the character trait, then you take us to the novel and we see the incidences or the things that do happen that make Flora that type of person. She is promiscuous. She's a promiscuous woman. A promiscuous woman. I think that would be the opposite of a Casanova. A man who keeps on having sex with so many women is a Casanova. Now, because Casanova does not apply to the woman, here we are saying that Flora is promiscuous. She's promiscuous in the sense that she engages in sexual encounters with several men, including her sister's boyfriend. To make it worse, she does not only go to other men, but she also involves the sister's boyfriend, well knowing that Mike belonged to her big sister, who had even done a lot of things for her. He had taken care of her, he had housed her. This person was young, so it must have been Jane who was paying fees for Flora. But Flora, in return, what does she do? She goes ahead to sleep with her sister's husband. So we are saying she sleeps with so many men, including her sister's boyfriend. Not because she does not know, but she knows. She also goes miles ahead because in the novel we are told she also gets into a sexual encounter with her school teacher without resistance. Mark that word, without resistance, because somebody could get a sexual encounter with a school teacher when the teacher has pressed on and on, though we do not really say it is right, but it could be a bit understandable. But here, somebody does not even have to press on, because wherever a man comes in, we see Flora readily giving in. She says, I found it difficult to resist him when he led me to his bedroom. Now, wherever you would lead her into a bed or dance with her or anything, Flora would easily give in. That is what makes her promiscuous. The other thing we would say about Flora, that is the fifth point, Flora is indecisive. From the word decide. Decision, decide, indecisive is the adjective. She's indecisive. She's unable to make quick decisions and effective decisions. We see her failing to make quick and effective decisions. Remember at one point of time, after the rape at the Muzungu's place, in the novel we are told Flora had been, nagged by the fact that she's being used by these men, and she had sworn never to do it again. But the moment Tom comes, she immediately jumps into his car, they go out, and the next thing we see is them going to a hotel. So it is like she does not take quick decisions and she does not take effective decisions. When Flora falls in love with Steve and realizes how good Steve is. We see Jen also trying to advise her by telling her that amongst the men I've seen, at least Steve is a serious and good man. Why don't you give in to Steve? Flora goes ahead to tell the sister that how can I just forget Tom so quickly? How can I just forget Tom so quickly? Because Tom was giving her money, like you said, is materialistic. Because she does not want to make a quick decision here and do the right thing. Then we can also zero on that and say, she is quite indecisive. Can we have Kayongo speak? Kayongo, are you there? Are you there? Kayongo? Kayongo? You wanted to say something? Yes? Trevor, speak. She's also, she's also gullible. We could add on the list. She's also gullible, right? That is her character trait. Gullible in the sense that she's easily deceived. Who are the people that deceive her here? Trevor? Trevor, are you there? Tom is one of them. Yes, she's easily deceived, and we see her being deceived by Tom. Tom together with Kit, not so. The other person, who else deceives her? Who? Almost all men. When you look at Mr. Lupoi, Lupoi deceives her because Lupoi promises a job. And wherever she keeps on going to the office, she's even sometimes locked out, being told that the boss is not in office when he's there. And until finally they tell her that there is no job for her. Whereas when Mr. Lupoi was taking her to the hotel, he had convinced her that he was going to get her a job. So we see Tom deceiving her. We see Mr. Lupoi deceiving her. You know, Tom does not only deceive her that he loves her, but Tom also deceives her in the sense that he tells her lies that he's a businessman. You know, when Flora meets Tom and inquires about the type of job that Tom does, having realized that this Tom is giving her a lot of money, Tom tells her that he's a businessman. But we later on learn that Tom had never been a businessman. Instead, he was engaged in stealing cars and dubious activities. We see Flora easily believing that without, finding out the person that she involved with. Her only job is to go out, hang in the bars, go to hotels, without even finding out the type of man that Tom is. No wonder later on she ends up into problems after discovering that Tom was quite a very dangerous man. So she's gullible, right? When you look at the character traits of Flora, majority of them are negative because the writer does not approve of what she does. Nantongo says she's ambitious. Very right. Flora is also ambitious. She's an ambitious woman. She shows strong desire and determination to succeed. She shows great determination to succeed. That is what makes her ambitious. Take an example. She started looking for a job before she even got what? Before she started looking for a job before she had even completed her senior four. That is being too ambitious. And because of her being so ambitious, she does things that she was not supposed to do, thinking that that was the only way that she would get a job. And in this case, we see her sleeping with the men. This woman had a dream of working in the airlines before she qualified, before she even became a senior four. student having completed it. True, she's a very ambitious person. And maybe we can also add that Flora is a liar, or we would say Flora is deceitful. Remember, all the things we have so far looked at are negative, and on a very big scale, we realize that the writer presents Flora with great negativity, though we cannot solely say that everything about Flora is negative. We have just talked about her being deceitful. You'll see how she tells lies. She even tells lies to Steve about her co-worker Judith by calling her Jane, because she thought that maybe Steve would go in for Judith. Now, when I want us to also look at, isn't there anything positive about Jane? Anyone there that has discovered some positive character trait about Jane, as we have only identified negative character traits here? Anything positive about her? Do you see anything positive about her? I can locate one. What is it that appears positive? She's determined. The moment Flora decides to have something, she will pursue it. She has very high determination. One, she's determined to succeed in her life as a woman and as a student. She's so determined to succeed in the sense that even with her involvement with the men, she manages to complete her senior form. She's so determined to succeed in the sense that even after her marriage, she goes back to school, and later on we see her joining the university and managing to acquire a degree. And while at the university, when you look at what happens there, we could conclude that Flora was quite hardworking. So maybe that is one of the positive things that we see in Flora, that she was such a determined person. She was so determined to succeed in her life, and she indeed achieves the success, more so as far as studies are concerned. The other positive thing we could see in Flora, she was appreciative. Flora is an appreciative character. Who does she appreciate? She appreciates her sister Jane. Jane takes care of her. And at one point of time, she comments very positively about her because she appreciates everything, and the time and the consolation and the company and, the support, more so the support that Jane gives her. You remember every time that Flora gets into problems, Jane is always by her side and always working with her to come up with a solution to the problem. So she turns out to be very appreciative for everything that the sister does for her, more so the support. She's also appreciative to Steve. She later realizes that Steve was a very good man. When Steve comes into her life, we see it is Steve who helps her with the pregnancy. It is Steve who helps her get a job, and she appreciates all these efforts from Steve. So positively, we would say she's determined and she's appreciative. Here, Nantongo is saying she's resilient, very good. We also say she's resilient. So far, we have had 3 character traits that are quite positive. 1, she's determined. 2, she's resilient. 3, she is appreciative. When we say she's resilient, she's able to recover and withstand quickly from difficult conditions. Resilient means she's able to recover and withstand or recover from difficult situations. Go back into the novel and see when does she recover so quickly and withstand difficult situations. Flora is able to recover from the rape of the men who drove her to the Mzungu's place, as well as the Mzungu. We are told she's raped repeatedly in that car. But later on, after that experience, much as it really beats her and she feels so bad. But we also realize that later on she recovers from this experience, and she manages to move on with her life. So she is resilient. We could say so far there are 3 character traits that appear quite positive that we could comment about the character of Flora. I don't know whether there is anything you would love to add on the character of Flora before we go to another character. Any other thing that we have not talked about that could be a character trait of Flora? Now, when you're presenting your essay on character traits, you mention the character traits, you explain what you mean by that, you get examples from the text to support what you are talking about. That is how you're supposed to build a paragraph when you're discussing somebody's character, so that you don't end up presenting what we can regard as skeletons of points that run for maybe 1, 2, 3 lines. I think if you are to discuss character, at least we should have 4 to 5 lines when we are talking about the character of somebody. 5 onward lines that will have presented character trait, mentioning a character trait, explaining what you mean by that, then citing examples from the text where that particular character trait is portrayed or revealed. You could cite at least a minimum of 2 examples where we can see that character trait. Because if it happens once, something might have happened once by mistake. But if it happens repeatedly, then that means that it is the personality of that individual that we are talking about. I hope we are done with the character traits of Flora, so that we can move on to some other character. Let us move to Steve daughter. And we know Steve daughter. I told you when you come up with a character, you begin by telling us who that person, what you know about that person. So people in the discussion room, what do you know about Steve daughter? Anybody there to tell us what you know about Steve daughter before we get into his character traits? Is anyone there to give us some information about Steve daughter? According to the text, what do you know about Steve daughter? Hello? Hello? What do you know about Steve daughter? Steve daughter. One thing I know about Steve daughter is that he happens to be Flora's husband. He's Flora's husband. 1. Steve daughter, according to the text, is the director of National Media Services. Steve daughter, according to the text, is a diplomat and ambassador to Zaire. Remember when Flora meets Steve daughter, we realize that this man has a very big job. That is the reason as to why they are living a luxurious life, because he happens to be a diplomat and an ambassador to Zaire. And that explains why he kept on going to Zaire. So when we try to define who Steve daughter is, Steve daughter is a diplomat and ambassador to Zaire. He is also a director of National Medical Service. And Steve daughter is also Flora's boyfriend. Later on in the text, he turns out to be a husband. He begins as a boyfriend and later on a husband. Thank you, Nantongo. Steve is a diplomat and ambassador to Zaire. Steve is also a director of National Media Service. Steve is first the boyfriend and later on a husband to Flora. And somebody has pointed out what we had not thought about. Steve is a father to Peter. Wonderful. That could come in the first paragraph as we try to define who Steve is. We could also add he's a father to Peter. Wonderful. Now, let's get into his character trait. Are we done with defining who Steve is? I think those 4 points can define who Steve is. And then we move straight to the character traits of Steve. 1, Steve is loving and caring towards Flora. I think when we mention the fact that Steve is loving and caring, we would go ahead to say to Flora, because great care, the care that we see from Steve is towards Flora. The love that we see is towards Flora. So we say it's loving and caring towards Flora. What shows? 1, when Flora is pregnant, much as it is not his pregnancy, he decides to cater for her medical bills and takes her to hospital. He keeps her safe at the university party where there are dangerous men. He realizes that these dangerous men are planning something. As he moves around that time, they go for a party when Mike, Jane's husband, has taken her. Steve realizes, before he even gets to know who Flora actually is, he gets to know that there are men that are talking about her and they are planning something evil about her. Now, he comes to warn her and ensure that she is safe. And indeed, he keeps her safe. That shows the love and care that Steve had towards Flora. So, number 2, we would say that Steve is also a generous man. Steve is generous. He pays, like I said, Flora's bill at the hospital. He does not only pay the bill at the hospital when she's terminating her pregnancy. We also see Steve paying Flora's bill at the restaurant. Remember that time when she leaves home and she's moving around town and she ends into a restaurant. She even takes lunch, yet she does not have money and she's looking for somebody who can help her pay. Then Steve appears. Then Steve pays for the bill. So we are saying Steve is generous. He pays her medical bill. He pays her restaurant bill. We see him being generous not only to Flora, he's also generous to Mr. Kungu. I hope you remember Mr. Kungu. When Mr. Kungu loses a brother, Steve and Flora go for the vigil. And then we see Steve offering 5 crates of beer for the night for people to enjoy. That shows how generous Steve is. So when we come to the issue of generosity, we would say Steve is not only generous to Flora, he's also generous to Mr. Kung. Somebody is saying here, that is Nantong, that Steve is a patient person. Patient in the sense that he waits for Flora. Patient that even with all the things we know about her, he never lets go of Flora. Yes, he's patient. He knows all the dubious things that Flora has done, but stands her. He's a very patient man. It is true. Steve is a very patient person. We could also say, number 4, that Steve is assertive. Steve is assertive. What makes him assertive here? He fights for his wife's rights. We see him fighting for the rights of Flora at the bar. When does this happen? When they go to the game park. Remember, Steve takes Flora to the game park. as they are going to have good life there. So we see the waiter coming to serve them, and then begins by serving the white people around, and then takes a lot of time without serving them, which annoys Steve, and makes a lot of noise about it together with Flora. When come to attack, we see him, showing the rights that the wife has over the whites that have been given great attention and priority over the black customers. So we see him being assertive. He says, yes, much as we are black, we are also customers. So look here, you have to serve us. We also have another character trait. We would say somebody is saying Steve is adamant. Namujuzi says Steve is adamant in love. Flora despises her background. Is adamant in loving Flora despite her background. I don't know what Namujuzi means by adamant in loving. Namujuzi, can you get on and explain to us what it means? He's adamant in loving Flora. Because when we say somebody is adamant, somebody adamant is somebody who is stubborn. I think the key issue that overrides everything here is what we started with when we said that Steve is loving and caring. And we said here specifically towards Flora, because we see him giving great love to Flora. But maybe the other person that he gives love is the son Peter, because we are told in the novel that he keeps playing with his own son as a father. Maybe some fathers don't have time to play with their children, but when it comes to Steve, he gives time to the son and plays with him to make him happy. We would also say, I think that is the 6th point, that Steve is understanding. He's a very understanding man. Somebody said he's patient. On top of that, he's also understanding. I don't know whether you are noticing that much as the writer gives Flora many negative character traits, when it comes to Steve, the writer gives Steve many positive character traits. I do not know whether there is any negative character trait that is given to Steve. All the character traits that are given to Steve are instead positive. When a character is given positive character traits, that means that there's a lot that the author wishes for the reader to learn from that particular character. In order to paint a character black and tell society that this is bad in society, the characters are given negative character traits, like we have seen with Flora. But when it comes to Steve, Steve is given many positive character traits. We are saying Steve is understanding. He understands Flora when she explains circumstances of her pregnancy. Flora tells him in his face that this was not his pregnancy and why he happens not to actually know who the father of the child is. But instead of condemning him, we see Steve supporting her. We see Steve understanding her because he has come to understand her. That is why he goes ahead to give help, other than rubbishing and pushing her away and showing her how terrible she is. He simply understands her, and then everything moves forward. We could say, maybe number 7, that Steve is a hardworking man. Steve happens to be very hardworking. When we were defining who Steve is, we said he's an ambassador. We said he's a diplomat. We said he's a director. You realize that Steve does not attain that on a silver plate. Steve attains that because of his education and hard work. And then people gain trust in him and then end up placing him in those very high positions. So we are saying that makes us say he's a very hardworking man who has raised himself so high as far as the job ladder is concerned, to the level of a diplomat and the director of a company. So we are also told, remember when he's married to Flora. Flora tells us that Steve wakes up very early and goes to the office at 8 and then returns home at 6. You can imagine all those hours of work, bearing in mind that he's in a very high position where nobody questions him, because at this point of time, he's working as a director, topmost position in a country where you are not answerable to your subordinates. But because of his hard work, he goes to his office very early and leaves late, keeping himself very busy and working effectively for the company, that is the National Medical, the National Media, not medical, the National Media Services. So there's a lot to learn from Steve as individuals, and as a man, I think people should learn the hard work, should learn the patience. We look at the way he loves his wife and handles his family, and so many other things that are quite admirable as far as Steve is concerned. Maybe finally, if we had to look at his character, we would say Steve is lively and cheerful. I don't know whether you've had thought about that. Steve is lively and cheerful. Lively and cheerful. When do we see him cheerful? Do we see him attending parties and, joking and laughing? This liveliness is seen back home, one as a father and has a husband. Flora keeps on saying that they share like moments with the husband. She, in most cases, shared light-hearted moments with the husband. And when he dies, she keeps on remembering that. They also tell us that he keeps telling stories to his son Peter. So when we say he's lively and cheerful, he would give them time, make them laugh. We know how he plays around with the son and makes the son very happy. When you look at Flora's home, you will agree with me that Steve makes and builds a happy home together with Flora. Maybe that is what makes us feel so sorry for Flora when Steve ends up being murdered by Tom. He loses a loving, caring, cheerful, and lively husband. A husband that had time for the wife. A husband that had time for the son. He's lively and cheerful. We see him playing and laughing with his wife, playing and laughing with his son, Peter, in the sense that I think they would miss his absence back home. That is all we could say as far as Steve is concerned. I don't know whether you have any other character trait that you could give that we have not talked about when it comes to Steve that is portrayed here by the writer, that we could look at and discuss and say, when we look at the personality of Steve, Steve turns out to be exactly that. Maybe we could go to Tom. If we don't have anything to add here, we could go to Tom. Who is Tom? Can somebody tell us who Tom is? Remember, we first begin by defining who these people are. Looking at information revealed to us in the novel, and then we define them. Who is Tom? This famous Tom in the novel. Tom is Kit's partner, because we know he has a friend called Kit, and that is a partner to Tom. So Tom is Kit's partner. Tom is a person that masquerades as a businessman. His kid's partner, who masquerades as a businessman, and later on maneuvers into very sensitive positions in the government. Because by the time he comes to kill Steve, he has maneuvered into very high positions in the government. So Tom is Kit's partner. He's a person who masquerades as a businessman. We say he masquerades as a businessman because it is a lie. He doesn't happen to be so. Tom is also a man who maneuvers his way into sensitive government positions. He masquerades into government positions. What else do you know about Tom? Anything more that you know about Tom? We have a few minutes left here. Let's quickly go through his character. 1, Tom is deceptive. He's a liar. We have already said he tells lies to Flora that he's a businessman, which he's not. He keeps telling lies he loves her, but when you look at his actions vis-a-vis what he says, we agree that Tom is a liar. We could also say Tom is exploitative. Tom is exploitative. I don't need to explain this. We see him exploiting Flora sexually. He exploits Flora sexually. We could say, number 3, Tom is vengeful. Tom is vengeful. Somebody vengeful is somebody who seeks revenge. We see him revenging to Steve when he takes his life simply because he arrested him, and 2, he managed to marry the woman that he claims he loves. Yes, Kayongo? Yes? Kayongo, speak. Tom is? Kayongo, hello? Tom, we could go on. I cannot hear Kayongo. Tom is exploitative. Somebody who exploits Flora sexually. Would say he's vengeful. We have said he's vengeful. Would say Tom is heartless. Remember when he beats up Flora that time he comes to rape her after killing her husband? He's so insensitive. So you could say he's heartless or insensitive. We could also say Tom is an opportunist. He takes advantage of situations. Maybe that explains why he even climbs that ladder in the government, whereas he's not a very educated person. Dear members, we have run short of time. I think we shall end there until next time, but I urge you to read Grief Child so that we can begin on the text in our discussions. I wish you the best and goodbye.